The private hospital wing was completely locked down by armed guards, yet the Mafia heir was dying a slow, agonizing death right under their noses. When the nurse finally grabbed a scalpel and ripped open his memory foam pillow, the horrifying discovery inside would ignite a bloody mob war. Boston's winters were notoriously unforgiving, but the chill inside the VIP wing of St. Jude's Medical Center was entirely man-made. It radiated from the men in tailored Italian suits who lined the corridors, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the fluorescent lighting, their hands resting casually over the telltale bulges in their jackets. They were the soldiers of the Russo Syndicate, and their Crown Prince Dominic Russo was currently bleeding out in Surgery Bay 3. Madeleine Hayes was a senior trauma nurse who had seen it all: gang violence, horrific car pile-ups, and industrial accidents. But the sheer chaos of that Tuesday night was unprecedented. Dominic had been brought in with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest and shoulder, the result of what the local news was already calling a brazen drive-by outside a high-end restaurant in the North End. The shooters had used armor-piercing rounds, a clear message that this wasn't a warning. It was an assassination attempt. When Dominic finally stabilized and was transferred to room 412, the entire 4th floor was requisitioned by his father, Arthur Russo. Arthur was a man who didn't raise his voice because he never had to. He simply bought the hospital's silence, paid off the board of directors, and installed his own private army in the halls. Madeleine was selected as Dominic's primary care nurse. Not because she asked for it, but because Arthur Russo's head of security, a ruthless enforcer named Leo Brooks, had done a deep background check on the entire nursing staff. Madeleine was clean. No gambling debts, no drug issues, no family ties to rival families. Just a dedicated 32-year-old professional trying to pay off her late mother's crushing medical bills. "You do your job, Miss Hayes, and nothing more," Leo had warned her on the first night, his voice a low gravel that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "You don't talk to the press. You don't ask him about his business. You keep him alive. If his heart stops, yours does too. Understand, Octix?" Madeleine had simply nodded, her jaw set. She wasn't easily intimidated, but she wasn't foolish either. For the first week, Dominic was kept heavily sedated. Madeleine's interactions with him were limited to checking monitors, changing IV bags, and redressing his surgical wounds. Even unconscious, he was a striking man. He had the sharp, aristocratic features of his northern Italian ancestry, a strong jawline covered in dark stubble, and an athletic build that was currently marred by surgical staples and bruising. He didn't look like a monster who ran illegal casinos or orchestrated extortion rackets. He looked human, vulnerable. On the 8th day, Dominic woke up. His first coherent moments were violent. He thrashed against the bed rails, his monitor blaring as his heart rate spiked, disoriented by the harsh lights and the heavy painkillers. Madeleine rushed in, expertly dodging his flailing arm, and pressed her hands firmly against his uninjured shoulder. "Mr. Russo, Dominic, look at me," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic in the room. His storm-grey eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, before locking onto hers. "You are in St. Jude's. You were shot, but you are safe. Your men are right outside." Dominic's breathing slowed, his chest heaving as he stared up at her. The wildness in his eyes faded, replaced by a cold, calculating intelligence. The shooter." He croaked, his throat dry from the intubation tube that had recently been removed. "I don't know anything about that," Madeleine said smoothly, reaching for a cup of ice chips. "My job is to fix the holes they put in you. Open up." To her surprise, the ruthless Mafia heir gave a weak, breathless chuckle. "Strictly business? I respect that." Over the next 2 weeks, an unexpected dynamic formed between them. Madeleine was strictly professional, refusing to be charmed by his dry wit or intimidated by his lineage. Dominic in turn seemed to find her lack of fear refreshing. In a world where everyone either wanted to kill him or kiss his ring, Madeline was the only person who treated him like a normal human being. She scolded him for trying to get out of bed too early, forced him to eat the bland hospital gelatin, and ignored the scowls of his bodyguards when she ordered them out of the room during his sponge baths. "You know, Madeline," Dominic said one evening, watching her adjust his IV drip. "Most people's hands shake when they're near me. Most people aren't looking at a man in a backless hospital gown who needs help using a bedpan," she retorted, without missing a beat marking his chart. Dominic laughed, a genuine warm sound that made Madeline's heart do an unexpected flutter. She quickly shoved the feeling down. She was a nurse. He was a crime boss. There was no universe where this ended well. But as Dominic's physical wounds began to knit together perfectly, a new, far more insidious problem began to emerge, a problem that medical science couldn't explain, and one that would soon turn Room 412 into a chamber of horrors. It started subtly in the 3rd week of his recovery. Dominic, who had been making remarkable progress, began complaining of stiffness in his neck and shoulders. The attending physician, Dr. Aris Thorne, Dr. Aris Vance. No, Dr. Aris Caldwell dismissed it as standard muscle atrophy from being bedridden. He prescribed a mild muscle relaxant and ordered an extra physical therapy session. But the pain didn't stop. It evolved. By the end of the week, the stiffness had turned into a burning sensation that radiated up the back of Dominic's skull and down his spine. He became irritable, snapping at his guards and refusing visits from his father's lieutenants. Madeline noticed the dark circles deepening under his eyes. The pain was keeping him awake, but worse, it was localized. It only ever spiked when he was lying down in bed. "It feels like fire in my veins," Dominic hissed through gritted teeth one night, his hands gripping the bedsheets so hard his knuckles were white. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Like glass grinding into my nerves." Madeline frowned, her pen hovering over his chart. She immediately checked his surgical sites. The incisions were clean, perfectly healed with no signs of infection. His vitals were slightly elevated due to the pain, but his blood work from that morning had come back spotless. No sepsis. No internal bleeding. "I'm going to page Dr. Caldwell for a stronger analgesic," she said, her voice laced with genuine concern. "No." Dominic grunted, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. His skin was clammy. "No more doctors. They just look at me like I'm a junkie trying to score a fix. They think it's withdrawal from the fentanyl." "Dominic, you're in agony," Madeline pleaded softly, looking down at his hand gripping hers. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up her arm, a sharp reminder of the blurring lines between them. "I can't just let you suffer." "Then figure it out, Maddie," he whispered, his grey eyes locking onto hers with a desperate vulnerability that broke her heart. He was a man used to being invincible, and something invisible was tearing him apart. "I trust you. I don't trust them." The implication hung heavy in the air. The Russo Syndicate was currently hunting the people responsible for the drive-by. Paranoia was at an all-time high. Dominic wasn't just suffering from phantom pain. He legitimately feared someone inside the hospital was trying to finish the job. Over the next 3 days, Dominic's condition deteriorated rapidly. The once charming and stoic air was reduced to trembling fits of agony. The burning sensation had spread, causing localized numbness in his fingertips and agonizing muscle spasms in his back. Madeline became obsessed. She stayed past her shifts, poring over his medical records, cross-referencing his symptoms with rare neurological disorders, post-surgical complications, and even heavy metal poisoning. She sneaked a vial of his blood to a trusted colleague in the toxicology lab, bypassing the official hospital system. The results came back negative for standard poisons arsenic and cyanide. Dr. Caldwell officially diagnosed Dominic with severe psychosomatic nerve pain essentially claiming the trauma of the shooting had caused his brain to invent the agony. He recommended a psychiatric evaluation. Arthur Russo was furious, threatening to burn the hospital down, but even the Mafia Don was powerless against an invisible illness. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Friday when the climax finally arrived. Madeline was at the nurse's station, nursing her third cup of stale coffee, when a blood-curdling scream echoed from room 412. It wasn't a shout of anger. It was a visceral, primal shriek of absolute agony. She dropped her mug, the ceramic shattering on the linoleum, and sprinted down the hall. Leo Brooks and 2 other heavily armed guards had already burst into the room by the time she arrived. Dominic was thrashing violently on the bed, his back arched in a brutal spasm. He was clutching the back of his head, his face a mask of pure torment. "Make it stop! Make it fucking stop!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Restrain him before he tears his stitches." Leo barked at the guards, who lunged forward to pin Dominic's arms. "Get your hands off him!" Madeline screamed, shoving past the massive men with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She leaned over Dominic, trying to hold his face steady. "Dominic, look at me, breathe." But as she cradled his head, her fingers brushed against his scalp, right at the base of his neck. She felt something wet. Pulling her hand back, she saw a tiny smear of fresh, bright red blood on her latex glove. She frowned, confusion cutting through the panic. There were no surgical wounds on his neck. Where was the blood coming from? She looked down at the pristine white pillowcase. Right where the back of his head had been resting, there was a microscopic pinprick dot of crimson. Suddenly a terrifying puzzle piece snapped into place. The pain only happened when he was in bed. The localized burning. The negative toxicology reports for standard poisons. "Get him up," Madeline ordered, her voice trembling but authoritative. "Leo, lift him up off the bed. Now." Leo hesitated, but the absolute certainty in her eyes made him comply. He hauled Dominic into a sitting position, the younger Russo gasping for air sweat pouring down his face. Madeline grabbed the expensive orthopedic memory foam pillow that had been brought in from Dominic's own penthouse a week ago to help him sleep. To the naked eye, it looked completely normal. But as she pressed her hand firmly against the dense foam, she felt a microscopic point of resistance. A tiny prick against her palm. "Give me your knife," she demanded, turning to Leo. The head of security narrowed his eyes. "What? I said give me your damn knife, Leo," she yelled, losing her professional composure entirely. Startled, Leo reached into his jacket and handed her a sleek, black tactical blade. Without a second's hesitation, Madeline drove the tip of the knife into the center of the pillowcase and violently ripped the fabric open, slicing deep into the dense memory foam. The room went dead silent. The only sound was Dominic's ragged breathing, embedded deep within the core of the memory foam, arranged in a grid-like pattern to perfectly align with where a person's neck and spine would rest, were dozens of ultrafine transparent glass hypodermic needles. They were so thin, they were practically invisible, designed to barely pierce the skin under the weight of a resting head. And inside the microscopic reservoirs of the needles, a pale yellowish liquid was slowly weeping into the foam. "Dear God," Madeline whispered, dropping the knife. Someone hadn't just tried to poison Dominic. They had engineered a slow, agonizing torture device right under the noses of the heaviest security detail in Boston. Every time he laid down to rest, the microscopic needles would pierce his skin, injecting microdoses of an untraceable localized neurotoxin. They were slowly paralyzing his nervous system, driving him insane with pain, while making the doctors believe it was all in his head. Dominic, leaning heavily against Leo, stared at the vivisected pillow. The haze of agony in his eyes was instantly replaced by a terrifying, cold-blooded fury. "Who?" Dominic breathed, his voice a lethal whisper. brought that pillow from my apartment." Leo's face drained of color. He looked at the needles, then slowly met Dominic's gaze. "Isabella, your fiancé brought it in last week. Said she wanted you to have a piece of home." The name hung in the sterile air of room 412, heavier than the lead aprons in the radiology department. Isabella. Dominic's fiancée wasn't a romance born of passion. It was a strategic alliance orchestrated by his father. Isabella Lombardi was the daughter of the New York-based Lombardi crime family, a merger intended to solidify the Russo syndicate's grip on the East Coast ports. But betrayal from a business partner was one thing. Attempting to slowly, agonizingly execute a man while smiling at his bedside was an entirely different breed of psychopathy. Madeline didn't have time to dwell on Mafia politics. Dominic was still in immense pain, the localized toxin wreaking havoc on his central nervous system. "Leo, I need a sterile biohazard container, tweezers, and a surgical magnifying glass." Madeline snapped, fully abandoning the hospital hierarchy. She was in charge now. Leo didn't argue. He bolted from the room to raid the supply closet. Madeline turned her attention back to Dominic. He was shivering his skin, pale and slick with a cold sweat. She grabbed a fresh set of latex gloves and gently rolled him onto his side, exposing the back of his neck. Under the harsh examination lights, she could finally see the microscopic red welts dotting his skin, perfectly aligned with the grid of needles hidden inside the foam. "You're going to feel a pinch," she murmured, her voice steady and soothing, a stark contrast to the violence surrounding them. "Maddie." Dominic rasped his voice, barely a whisper. He reached out blindly, and she immediately intertwined her free hand with his. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Don't let them take me to the morgue yet." "You're not dying on my shift, Russo," she replied, her eyes focused on his neck. "I have student loans to pay off, and your father's hazard pay is too good to lose." A faint, strained smile touched his lips before he groaned in agony. Leo returned with the supplies. Using the magnifying glass and precision tweezers, Madeline carefully extracted 2 of the microscopic glass needles that had broken off and embedded themselves in Dominic's skin. She dropped them into the biohazard vial. "I have a contact at the Agilent Technologies testing facility over in Lexington," Madeline said, referencing the private state-of-the-art biochemistry lab used by high-end pharmaceutical companies. "They have a next-generation GCMS mass spectrometer. If I send this sample there under the table, we can identify the exact compound in 2 hours. The hospital lab will take days and ask too many questions." Leo nodded grimly. "Give it to me. I'll have an escort take it there. Nobody stops our cars." Once the sample was gone, Madeline administered a broad-spectrum nerve block to ease Dominic's immediate suffering. As the medication finally took hold, his breathing leveled out. The tension drained from his muscular frame, leaving him exhausted and vulnerable. For the first time since the ordeal began, Arthur Russo, the reigning boss of the syndicate, entered the room. He was an older, terrifyingly calm man, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. He looked at the sliced-open pillow, the biohazard bag, and finally at his son. "Isabella." Arthur said the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. Dominic opened his eyes, the grey depths now cold and calculating. "She's working with someone local. The Lombardis wouldn't make a move like this without a Boston crew backing them up. It's Gallagher. Thomas Gallagher and the Irish syndicate in the Seaport district. They want the docks." Arthur's expression darkened. "Gallagher is a dead man. And the Lombardi girl. I will have her brought to the warehouse." "No," Dominic interrupted, his voice gaining strength as the pain finally receded. "She thinks I'm dying. She thinks her little science project worked. Let her come here. Let her think she won." Over the next few hours, the VIP wing transformed from a hospital ward into a lethal trap. Madeline's contact at the lab called back with terrifying results. The pale yellow liquid was a highly concentrated, synthetic derivative of conotoxin, a venom naturally found in predatory marine cone snails. It was engineered to bypass traditional toxicology screens, attacking the voltage-gated ion channels in the nerves. Left unchecked, it would have eventually paralyzed Dominic's diaphragm, suffocating him in his sleep, while doctors helplessly labeled it a sudden respiratory failure. Armed with the knowledge, Madeline was able to administer a targeted flush of his system and specific antagonists to neutralize the remaining toxin. As she worked, brushing her fingers against his skin to check his pulse, Dominic watched her intently. The barriers between the Mafia heir and the trauma nurse had completely shattered. "Why did you fight so hard for me, Maddie?" he asked quietly, the room empty, save for the two of them. Most people would have let the monster die, would have let the monitor flatline and looked the other way. Madeline paused, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Because I don't see a monster. I just see a man who trusts me. And I don't betray the people who trust me." Dominic reached up his large, rough hand, gently cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, sending a warm thrill down her spine. "When this is over, when the dust settles, Madeline, I'm taking you to dinner, somewhere without fluorescent lights and jello. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Russo," she whispered, her heart racing. But the romantic quiet was shattered by a sharp knock on the door. It was Leo. "She's here," the bodyguard announced, racking the slide of his suppressed pistol. "Isabella just pulled up to the valet in a black SUV. She's coming up to the 4th floor." The staging was flawless. Dominic lay perfectly still in the hospital bed, the lights dimmed to a mournful low. The heart monitor had been rigged by Madeline to show a dangerously slow, erratic rhythm. The oxygen mask was strapped over his face, obscuring his expression. Madeline stood by the bedside, playing the part of the grieving, defeated medical professional. She held a clipboard, her head bowed. The door clicked open. Isabella Lombardi stepped into room 412. She looked immaculate, dressed in a sleek, black Burberry trench coat, her dark hair styled perfectly, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. She looked like a mourning widow, practically vibrating with a hidden toxic triumph. She offered a polite, deeply fake smile to Madeline. "Nurse, how is my beloved doing?" "The doctors told me his condition worsened overnight." "He is unresponsive, Miss Lombardi," Madeline said, keeping her voice entirely clinical, suppressing the urge to slap the woman. "His nervous system is failing. We don't expect him to make it through the night." A flash of genuine delight danced in Isabella's dark eyes before she expertly masked it with a sorrowful gasp. She walked over to the bed, placing the white lilies on the nightstand. She reached out her perfectly manicured fingernails, tracing the edge of the blanket over Dominic's chest. "Could you give us a moment?" Isabella asked Madeline, not bothering to look back. "I'd like to say my final goodbyes." "Of course," Madeline said softly. She walked toward the door but didn't leave. She stood in the shadows near the en-suite bathroom, watching. Isabella leaned down her face, inches from Dominic's ear. The room was so quiet, Madeline could hear the venomous whisper. "You arrogant fool," Isabella hissed, dropping the grieving fiancé act entirely. "You really thought my family would just hand over our legacy to the Russos. Thomas Gallagher sends his regards. By tomorrow your father will be too broken by your death to see us coming. The docks will be ours, and you're just going to suffocate in your sleep like a pathetic, helpless animal." She smiled a cruel, twisting smirk and reached out to smooth his hair. Suddenly, a hand shot out from beneath the blankets, moving with lightning speed. Dominic's fingers wrapped around Isabella's throat like a steel vice. Isabella shrieked, but the sound was choked off as Dominic effortlessly lifted her off her feet, slamming her against the wall beside the bed. The rigged heart monitor was instantly silenced by a remote switch triggered by Leo, who stepped out from the bathroom shadows alongside Arthur Russo. Dominic ripped the oxygen mask off his face. The sick, dying man was gone. In his place was the apex predator of the Boston underworld. "Hello, my love," Dominic snarled, his grey eyes blazing with murderous intent. Isabella gagged, clawing uselessly at his massive hand, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "You should have checked my toxicology report." Arthur stepped forward, his cane clicking against the linoleum. He looked at the struggling woman with absolute disgust. "Did you really think a few glass needles and some snail spit could take down a Russo in his own city?" "Please!" Isabella choked out her face, turning a deep shade of purple. Dominic didn't blink. "You gave me 3 weeks of pure, unadulterated hell, Isabella. You made me beg for death in this bed." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. "But you forgot one crucial detail. I have an excellent nurse." With a flick of his wrist, Dominic tossed Isabella to the floor at his father's feet. She collapsed, coughing and gasping for air, her pristine trench coat rumpled and ruined. "Take her," Arthur ordered Leo coldly. "Bring her to the meatpacking facility in the seaport. Have Gallagher brought there too. It's time we renegotiated our territorial borders." Leo hauled Isabella up by her hair, ignoring her desperate sobbing pleas, and dragged her out the private back elevator. The heavy doors closed, sealing her fate. The silence that descended on room 412 was deafening. Arthur looked at his son, then turned to Madeline. The Mafia Don gave her a slow, respectful nod, an honor rarely bestowed on anyone outside the family. "Miss Hayes, the Russo family owes you a debt that cannot be quantified in money. However, a significant sum will be transferred to your accounts by morning. Your mother's medical debts are erased." Madeline was stunned, barely able to process the magnitude of what had just happened. "Thank you, Mr. Russo." Arthur left the room to oversee the impending war against Gallagher and the Lombardis. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, rolling his shoulders. The nerve block was working perfectly. He looked at Madeline, the lethal edge in his eyes, melting away, replaced by the warm, genuine connection they had forged in the crucible of room 412. "I need to get out of this hospital gown," Dominic said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I have a dinner date to plan." Madeline walked over, crossing her arms, though she couldn't hide her smile. "You are not medically cleared for discharge, Dominic." Dominic stood up, towering over her, his uninjured arm wrapping gently around her waist. He pulled her flush against his chest. "Maddie, darling, I think we both know I don't follow the rules." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a promise. It was fire gratitude and an undeniable passion that had been building for weeks. Madeline kissed him back fiercely, her hands finding the thick hair at the nape of his neck, the exact spot she had saved from the poisoned needles. When they finally broke apart, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "Pack your things," he whispered. "There's a black Mercedes-Benz Maybach waiting for us downstairs. You're coming with me." Madeline looked at the sliced-open pillow on the floor, then up into the eyes of the Mafia boss's son. She knew the danger of his world, but for the first time in her life, she felt entirely safe. "Let's go," she smiled. "If you were captivated by this intense tale of Mafia betrayal, deadly secrets, and unexpected romance, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this story with your friends who love a thrilling plot twist, and make sure to subscribe to our video channel for more gripping, heart-pounding stories. Drop a comment below, telling us what you thought of Madeline's quick thinking. Would you have figured out the poisoned pillow? Stay tuned for our next thrilling upload.